Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's my first time actually staying in Bahrain. I've been through a few times. I've been some work in the region, and thanks to Tamkeen and University of Essex and Professor Hitra for inviting me. And I hope none of you will regret it after I make my comments today. By the way, I don't think I'm genius. Because I'm going to change the title of my talk. And I'm going to substitute the word revolution for ecosystem. You'll see the ecosystem plays a role in the revolution, but it isn't a revolution. I want to talk about the revolution. 18 months ago, I launched a program within Babson College. It's called Babson Global. It's a separate organization to address the following situation. One morning, maybe it's a cold morning, a chilly morning like this morning, we as a collective body of the world's experts in leading knowledge and leading practice in entrepreneurship get the proverbial knock on the door from somebody who identifies him or herself as the head of state, let's say governor, or mayor, or the like, who throws down in no uncertain terms the following challenge. Can you, or we, actually create in 5 years, a revolution in my and his city or state so that the city or state will be unrecognizable? Money is no object, and the objective ultimately is to create employment, innovation, vibrancy in the quality of life, sustainability of all of the above, the desire to attract attention as a hub or regional capital of entrepreneurship and startups. And so this head of state throws down the challenge and says, can we as a collective body answer that challenge positively? And so I'll ask you to think for yourselves of that situation and join me in thinking how we can answer yes to that question. How we can pick up the glove and actually in 5 years bring about a revolution of entrepreneurship in that city or state or country or region. And along the way, we'll have to ask ourselves, have we accumulated, accrued enough collective wisdom of the kind that we've been hearing about in the last day and a half in this conference and other forums as well, to be able to do that, to be able to measurably, tangibly, undeniably move the needle of entrepreneurship from one point to another point in a way that's sustainable. That's the challenge. And my own answer to the question, and I'm saying this as formerly a venture capitalist and certainly formerly an entrepreneur, educator, and researcher, my answer is absolutely yes, we can do it. Absolutely yes, we can do it. And that it requires us to do certain things, to structure the process in the right way, in a certain way, and it requires just a few skips, I call them skips of faith, not leaps of faith, but skips of faith, which I think are reasonable to make and unavoidable, unfortunately or fortunately. So my purpose in the coming 25 or 30 minutes is to present 7 principles or prescriptions for exactly how to go about moving this needle of entrepreneurship in ways that are tangible. And I'll go a little bit further out on a limb, because I realize that's a little bit of an ambitious statement, and certainly one that I hope encourages and brings about debate and discussion, because it's an important one. I'll go a little bit further out on a limb and claim that the 7 principles that I'll present, they're not recommendations, they're not suggestions, they're not things that I think we ought to do. They're things that we have no choice but to do. If we want to accomplish the objective in 5 years of measurably and irreversibly moving the needle of entrepreneurship, we have to do what I'm telling you the principles and prescriptions are, or something very similar to them. We have no choice. We have two choices, actually. There are three. One is we can do these. Secondly, we can do nothing. Or third, we can continue to do things that we know don't work. Those are the three choices, I think. Therefore, there is no choice. Now, I don't make these claims lightly, but I think it's useful to have them out there. So I won't have many slides today. Oh, somebody put them up there already, fine. So you can see these are the 7 principles. And I will zoom into each one of them for just a few minutes. The first is, you have to focus on a certain kind of entrepreneurship. This has been mentioned before, I'll mention it again. Secondly, you have to be very, very focused geographically. Third, you have to attack many of the elements of the ecosystem in parallel. Fourth, you need to quantify very precisely how much entrepreneurship you need. Fifth, there needs to be an independent team of people doing this. That's not beholden to anybody. Sixth, it has to be an extremely high priority, and there has to be resources allocated to the effort. Significant resources, I'll tell you how much. And then finally, there has to be a lot of learning and experimentation along the way. So let me start right off with the first. Can we turn off the slides for a second? Usually you can just put B. Yeah. So let me start with first. The first is you have to be very clear about what we mean by entrepreneurship. And I'm happy to say that already those who have spoken before me have mentioned this. But I think it's worth elaborating and mentioning again. There is a huge divide between self-employment and entrepreneurship. Both are important. Self-employment may be one of the solutions to poverty, but it is not the solution to economic growth and development. There's a lot of evidence for that. They're not the same in terms of process, they're not the same in terms of motivation, they're not the same in terms of the outcomes, they're not the same in terms of how you go about achieving them, nor even what the definition of achievement is. Perhaps the only thing that self-employment and entrepreneurship have in common is that you, if you're doing it, are your own boss. Probably. And maybe that you have to register a company. Yet, ironically or surprisingly, in policy formation throughout the world, policymakers lump these two things together in the same bucket. Huge mistake. Policymakers don't like this distinction for two reasons, at least. They find it uncomfortable. It's politically sensitive, politically incorrect. But the implicit belief in this regard of most policymakers is either, first of all, it's not fair to allocate resources to those who are going to win and generate wealth for themselves. It's not fair. It's not fair to the people who are disadvantaged. And secondly, we don't have to worry about it. Because if we create enough self-employment, the entrepreneurship will emerge naturally by itself. To quote our friend Borat in his famous movies, not. The evidence, it's a complicated topic. And in fact, we really don't know. But the evidence that we have is that there's very, very little transformation from self-employment to entrepreneurship. I'll say in a minute what I mean by entrepreneurship. Now, there's no doubt regarding the first concern, there is a political cost. But I think the solution to that is not by backing away from the challenge of developing policies for real entrepreneurs, and not just for the self-employed. These are two separate things, and they should be viewed separately, for example, as allocating budgets for sport and education and foreign direct investment. They're two separate things. Of course, if you have $1 or whatever your currency is, €1, you have to decide how to use it. But usually that's not the case. So there are a number of terms current for the kind of entrepreneurship that I think is helpful and I think that will bring about the revolution that I think we all are trying to accomplish. The terms are high-impact entrepreneurs, high-potential entrepreneurs, transformational entrepreneurs, opportunity-based entrepreneurs, all of which reflect that distinction. I don't think the terminology is that important. High-impact, I personally don't like the term because you're looking back. You only know if you have impact when you look back to see what you've done. That's easy. But I will all use those terms fairly interchangeably, but when I use the term entrepreneurship, that's what I'm referring to. I think the fundamentally distinguishing characteristic between the self-employed and the real entrepreneur is level of aspiration. I'm not just saying that because in the background I'm a psychologist, because I have a PhD in psychology. But I think that the research, in fact, focuses on that distinction, is the ambition of the entrepreneur. The self-employed person, the self-employed business owner, is happy and satisfied putting food on the table, clothing on the kids, and probably education and health care. Those are fantastic things. Please don't misinterpret me at all as saying anything wrong with those. But that leads to satisfaction. That's the end of the game. The entrepreneur is never, ever happy or satisfied with any accomplishment. I'll just give a simple personal example. My grandfather came to the United States when he was 2 years old in 1900 and dropped out of school when he was in 3rd grade. And he became a painter and a wallpaper hanger. Remember in the old days there used to be wallpaper, maybe there still is in certain parts of the world, wallpaper. And he actually ended up having his own store where he sold painting and wallpaper materials to other painters and wallpapers in Philadelphia. His dream was that he would make enough money so that his son, my father, would never have to do that. Would never have to do that. And my father went off and got a PhD in physics. A really good job that my self-employed grandfather would brag to all the neighbors about. 2 generations later, skipping 2 PhDs, my father's and mine, my son, 28 years old, is an entertainment entrepreneur, created one of the hottest nightclubs that there is, and has a concept of building a global nightclub business, franchise. Whether he'll succeed or not, I don't know. But that's what's driving him. His motivations are complicated. Complex, not complicated. That's the difference between self-employed and entrepreneur. I don't think it's necessary here to repeat why that kind of entrepreneurship is so important for economic development. It creates the jobs, it creates the wealth, it creates the taxes, and so on and so forth. It is a murky area how this kind of aspiration, how this kind of ambition develops in people. But we know that it's related to economic growth and development. I do know, for example, that the power of the story is very, very high. When I was teaching my class in International Entrepreneurship at the Harvard Business School, it consisted primarily of 24 stories, cases. You've seen Harvard Business School cases. There's stories of entrepreneurs throughout the world, normal, accessible people doing abnormal, extraordinary things. And inevitably, by the end of the semester, at least 10%, if not more, of the 150 to 200 students I have come up to me or write to me and say, you know, I never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. But if she can do it, so can I. I see the example, and it's an accessible example to me. That's just one of the ways in which aspiration develops. The second step, having defined what it is we're trying to accomplish, we have to get... Can we turn off the video as well? We don't need it. Is it possible? Yeah, we don't need it. And I'm jealous. The second step is we have to be very specific geographically. We need geographical focus. If you look around the world, at where entrepreneurship is occurring. I mean, when we want to create a revolution somewhere, we can learn from things that have happened elsewhere. And as we look around the world, we see that entrepreneurship takes place in very, very, very concentrated pockets. Very concentrated pockets. I'll give you an example of Puerto Rico, where we've done a project. Puerto Rico is an island. This may sound a little bit familiar. It's a little bit bigger than Bahrain. It's 100 miles by 35 miles. And in general, it's not a place that you'd expect to see entrepreneurship. They themselves in Puerto Rico say we're not an entrepreneurial society. Most of the people with entrepreneurial ambitions, because they can't leave to the United States. There are a lot of successful Puerto Rican entrepreneurs in the United States, but not in Puerto Rico. But there are two small cities in Puerto Rico. One is Mayagüez, a region actually, another one called Caldas, in which there's lots of entrepreneurship. These two small places are hotbeds of entrepreneurship for a variety of reasons. One, because there's a university there, a good engineering school, and the other one because there's a crazy mayor who thought that, unfortunately he recently died, who thought that entrepreneurship was a good thing and spent 10 years building entrepreneurship in his little bitty city outside of San Juan. Can we turn this back? I want to show you another example of what I mean by concentrated entrepreneurship. This goes forward. Maybe you can flip it forward. I only have 5 slides. This shows the employment patterns of innovative entrepreneurial businesses in Massachusetts. You recognize that's Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, okay? And where it's red, there's lots of this. There's lots of it. Okay? You can see there's concentrations around Boston. Go to the next slide. We're zooming down. As you look down even more, you see that there are 3 particular areas within Boston. You see one out in Route 495, one around Route 128, and one down near MIT, Harvard. Okay? Next slide. It turns out that there's one building in Kendall Square in Cambridge that has by far the highest concentration of entrepreneurship in the world. It has 4 times the density of entrepreneurship as Silicon Valley. 136 startups per square mile. Because of one building that has 7 floors where high potential entrepreneurs are looking. There are 320 startups in that one building. It's called the Cambridge Innovation Center. By the way, it's a for-profit business and it's not an incubator. You can turn it off now, thank you. So we need geographical specificity. A city, a very small region, a very small country in order to carry out the revolution. Perhaps in a place such as Bahrain, that's not so difficult to do. In larger countries, it's more of a challenge, but it has to be done. Most policymakers view the nation, the country, as the unit of analysis. But if we want to intervene and in 5 years actually achieve what we're trying to achieve, we can't afford to do it. Countries are very important. Regulatory, legal environments, that availability of national and federal resources are important. But they themselves will not bring about the revolution. We've done this, for example, in Manizales, Colombia, a city of 400,000 people. You can focus on all the elements there in a small city. We've been doing it now in Concepcion, Chile, 1.8 million people. It's being done in Barcelona, for example, with Barcelona Activa. I think there's a panelist here from Barcelona Activa. That focus is really important. Third, having focused on a specific geography, one of the things that allows you to do is to look at the entire ecosystem, to attack the elements of the ecosystem that supports and is conducive to entrepreneurship in parallel. One of the things that we've learned from experience around the world is that piecemeal efforts, which are common, piecemeal efforts, doing only one thing, don't work. In fact, they often backfire, and I'll say why. Let me show you, if I may, on the slide. Next slide. You can't read it. I know you can't read it. I'm going to have a version of this next that you can read. but I want this up there, and I can make it available to people. This is a particular picture of the elements of the entrepreneurship ecosystem. I'll read what the elements are once we go to the next following slide. There are 13. It's a little bit more readable, but I'll tell you what they are. It starts with leadership, goes to government, culture, success stories, human capital, financial capital, entrepreneurship organizations, education infrastructure, economic clusters, networks, support services, and early customers. There are 13 elements. Now, there are many different pictures around of what the entrepreneurship ecosystem looks like. What are the factors that are necessary in order to create sustainable entrepreneurship in any given region or society? And this map is very similar in a lot of ways, with a couple of important differences. One of the differences is that there are no arrows. There is no attempt here to indicate what causes what, because in reality, the causal paths are very complicated. Yes, over generations, over decades, we know that investment in education tends to lead to entrepreneurship and economic development. We know that, but not in a 5-year period necessarily. We know that regulatory environments of certain kinds over time tend to foster or be conducive to entrepreneurship, but over long periods of time, and in fact, the relationships tend to be very weak. For those of you who are familiar with correlation coefficients, the correlation coefficients tend to be in the order of 0.2, 0.3, and explain a few percentage points of the variance. And then thirdly, what's even more important is that sometimes effects are causes and causes are effects. So the success stories, those are the results. That's what we're trying to create. That's the evidence that we're successful. But having success stories are also a cause. Oftentimes, through random occurrences, a success that occurs can trigger and stimulate change in an entire society to make it more entrepreneurial because it inspires. It does other things, but it inspires. So the success story is not just a result, it's also a cause. And so what this picture comes to say, it says a few things. One is that you have to do many things in parallel. That's number one. Number two, each ecosystem is highly idiosyncratic. What works in one place, the configuration of education and capital and culture and leadership and regulatory environment, what works in one place, what works in Silicon Valley, or what worked in Silicon Valley, doesn't work in other places. You know how many Siliconia there are in the world? Does anybody have any idea? There's a website called Siliconia. It lists all of the silicons. Does anybody have any idea how many there are? It's surpassed 80. It was 79 the last time I counted, and there's at least one more. Everybody's trying to emulate Silicon Valley, but it's impossible. President Medvedev went 2 months ago, or 3 months ago, to Silicon Valley to build the Silicon Valley of Russia. It can't work. You can't copy Silicon. You have to grow your own, based on the specifics of the situation. One of the things that researchers in economic development policy have discovered is that when economic policy works, it works because of the many variables working together. It's what's called a very high order interaction. Very high degree of specificity. Some specificity sometimes boiling down to the fact that a certain person is in charge of a certain ministry or department at a certain point of time. That has to be designed specifically for the situation. So that's the third principle. The fourth principle, you can turn that off. The fourth principle is that you can and need to set very specific, measurable, quantifiable objectives as to how much entrepreneurship you're trying to create. Now that may sound like a little bit of a surprising statement, but first of all, why is it important to have a quantity of entrepreneurship? You all know that entrepreneurship creates entrepreneurship. That when entrepreneurs do what they do, first of all, it's a highly addictive activity. When entrepreneurs do it, they do it again, and they do it again. It's exhilarating. It's better than, I've heard, it's better than taking drugs. But it's worse than that. Not only is it highly addictive, but entrepreneurs try to inflict other people with the disease. Entrepreneurs like other people to be entrepreneurs. They encourage other people to be entrepreneurs. They try and persuade them. They invest in them. They become advisors. They go and lecture at universities. They join boards of directors. They sometimes form angel funds, or they form venture capital funds. So they try to create more of it. And even more than that, and what economists call spillover effects. I mentioned already, successful entrepreneurship creates taxes. Tax revenues are a good thing. An entrepreneur friend of mine says, hey, I had a great guy pay a lot of taxes. It creates wealth. It creates jobs. These are the economic spillovers. By the way, it creates other things as well. It creates more social awareness, more transparency, better governance. So there are positive feedback arrows. When you have entrepreneurial success, it creates more success. And every engineer, are there any engineers out here? There must be a few at least. Good. Well, at least I know that some people are awake. That's a good sign. You know from engineering classes that when you have positive feedback loops, you sometimes reach the tipping point at which it becomes self-sustaining, right? And so the question is, at what point does entrepreneurship, because it has all these positive feedback loops, at what point does it become self-sustaining? Well, for the last couple of years, I've been playing around with the rule of thumb, which I'm sure is imprecise, but I'm also sure is helpful and reasonably accurate. And the rule of thumb is, for every 50,000 to 150,000 inhabitants, for every 50,000 to 150,000 inhabitants, if there is one high potential, and I can define what that is, entrepreneurial venture being generated every year, for those 50 to 150,000 inhabitants, you reach a tipping point. What that means, for example, is Boston with its, let's say, 3 million people, 30 per year. And let's say Manizales, Colombia, with its 400,000 people, it's about 7 or 8 per year on a sustainable basis, every year on a sustainable basis. If you can achieve that, you'll achieve a tipping point, or if you achieve something close to that, I believe. So you've set specific objectives in a specific area and are intervening holistically in parallel on a variety of dimensions, a variety of elements of the ecosystem, having defined entrepreneurship as the ambitious kind, the high aspiration kind of entrepreneurship. What do you do next? I think that you need a separate organization, a temporary but separate organization. Government has the mandate to look holistically at the environment and try and improve it. It has the mandate to look at education and finance or economics. It has the mandate to look at infrastructure. It has, to some extent, the mandate to influence culture. It certainly has the mandate to influence the regulatory environment. It has the mandate to create entrepreneurship holistically. It just doesn't have the competence. I'm not referring to any government in particular. In general, and this was said yesterday in the panel, all right, look at this. You don't expect governments to be entrepreneurial. On the other hand, the private sector, which has the competence, doesn't have the mandate. There is no body which is independent and has both the mandate and the competence to intervene holistically and encourage, foment the entrepreneurship ecosystem. So I think you need to recruit and train and operate a SWAT team of what I call entrepreneurship enablers who are capable at intervening in the different aspects. The good news is that we know a lot collectively as a body of knowledge and a body of experts. We know collectively a lot about what kind of skills they need. We know collectively a lot about how to impact culture. We know collectively a lot about what kind of education is required and the kind of financing ecosystem. We know a lot about the regulatory environment.
You can just wrap the session and let's go for the Q&A. You can take just 3 questions. I think we're running out of time.
3 questions will be all right.
By the way, I think this body,
we need to close the floor.
When would you like to conclude?
Now, because we are running out.
One is it should be temporary. It should have an end-of-life date. Like when you go to the supermarket and you turn it over and it says sell-by, a sell-by date, it should have a sell-by date of 4 to 5 years. Then after 5 years it's the standard, and the second year it's going to be
only 3 questions. Only 3 questions.
And what do I mean by results? Achieving the number of ventures on an annual basis that will create the tipping point, the self-sustaining ecosystem that I talked about. So that's number 5. Number 6. The bad news. Nothing is free. Attaining the entrepreneurial revolution is not free. It costs 2 things. 1, it costs making it a priority. A priority. Everywhere in the world that I've been, and by now it's a couple of dozen countries or cities, everywhere I've seen, entrepreneurship is on the lips of the leaders. And they sincerely mean that it's important. But I've yet to see the leader who says it's in the top 3. It's as important, and maybe even more important, than welfare. It's as important as healthcare. It's as important as defense. It's as important as education. That I've yet to see.
If you could instruct him, like you can, if you could wrap up.
But if you believe, I believe what Zolnak said yesterday, that if we don't create this level of entrepreneurship, we'll be sitting, anybody see this picture? We'll be sitting in 2050 on a very huge junk pile. It's absolutely necessary. Secondly, so how much is enough in terms of actual financial resources? I use a rule of thumb. I say if you're not investing anywhere between 0.5 to 1% of your annual budget directly on stimulating entrepreneurship, you're not spending enough. And I think if you run the numbers, you'll probably realize it's about 10 times as what, wherever you live, the leaders are spending today. But that's what's required in order to actually bring about the revolution. And then finally, the 7th principle is that it's absolutely critical to behave as you're going about executing on this plan, achieving those objectives, to behave in a way that is entrepreneurial. This is still very complicated business. It is still more art than science. There are still a lot of things we don't know. But so it's important that there be experimentation, that there be learning, that there be flexibility, that there be the ability to identify opportunities in the way we go about bringing about this entrepreneurial revolution in our societies, in our regions. So let me just summarize, and then I would love to have some dialogue with you.
Yeah.
There are 7 principles. Focus on entrepreneurship, not self-employment. Focus on a specific geography. Quantify how much entrepreneurship you want. Attack the ecosystem on the whole, holistically. Create an independent SWAT team to carry it out. Allocate the priority and budget. And begin to take action. Those are the 7 principles. We have a guiding map of where to intervene. We know a lot about how to intervene in the pieces. Is this foolproof? No, it's not foolproof. There's a lot of uncertainty out there. But anybody who sells you a program that's foolproof has proven that he or she is a fool. Is it based on sound principles? Yes, I believe that it's based on everything that we know about entrepreneurship collectively. Why hasn't anyone thought of this before? I think there are just a few insights that are not tremendous insights, twisting the problem in just a slightly different way and turning it from a problem of analysis into a problem of action. One of the things that we know is that problems that are highly complex cannot be understood in the absence of action. They can only be understood by trying to solve them. They can't be understood by analyzing them. Can it do harm? Probably not. Might it work? Yes. Can we afford to wait until we're sure? No. The alternative of doing nothing, doing things we don't work, that we know don't work, or the alternative of waiting, these are all unacceptable. So I want to just come back to Zoltan Axe's, Professor Axe's framing of the problem yesterday, with which I agree. If we don't want to end up on the junk heap of history by 2050, we have no choice. We have no choice. If we really believe that entrepreneurship has the positive effects that I mentioned, I think that most people in this room do really believe that, then we have no choice than to immediately begin embarking on many such revolutions of the kind, very similar to the ones that I described here. And just to paraphrase Victor Hugo, who said, I'll let you be there 1 second, just the last sentence, to paraphrase Victor Hugo, who said, there's no army as powerful as an idea whose time has come. I think that's true about entrepreneurship as well. There's